Hi, I'm Nadhir Nor, and I am the writer and illustrator for the comic A Call. I would say that it's about a boy in a distant future who's trying to navigate through a post-apocalyptic Malaysia and trying to figure out what his surroundings mean to him and like how he can really dig deep into what really happened in the history. For now, I do a lot of illustrations. But when I was in high school, I did a lot of comics too. Like I joined a lot of original characters role-playing groups. So and there is that sense of community when it comes to like role-playing groups because you're like collaborating with other artists. So I like the idea of that, of like working on something together, but then having your own story. So that's why I decided to apply for Sound Comics Anthology. And it will be nice to tell a story where I mean like somewhere closer to home, which is with Difference Engine. So that's why I decided to apply and like try to go back into comics that I have not done for almost a decade. Yeah. To me, how mythology and folklores and traditions affect our daily lives, but like most of the time we don't really talk about them. It's just something that's a part of our life. So I wanted to see how it would be if people in the future treat our lives and our stories in the same way. What would happen if you're all just nothing more than like a distant forgotten myth, like a forgotten tradition. So I was very inspired by that idea itself. Visually, I was looking at Radin Saleh's paintings and also old photographs of ruins in the Middle East. So it's really fascinating to look at old images and trying to reconsider who took these photos and who painted these paintings and what kind of things inform them to depict it the way it is. So I want to try to explore that, but like in a more contemporary way of doing it. Yeah. The creation myth itself, so the idea where we come from. I think it's very fascinating how even though cultures around the world are so far from one another, like the idea of origin itself, it's always sort of intertwined with one another even though we are so far. And like in this story of this like little humans trying to figure things out, there's always this ominous higher consciousness at the back, and I think that's very fascinating. And I would like to, I mean, I try to emulate them in my work, like this idea of like this little, people who think that they're so big, but actually, at the back of them, they're actually this bigger idea and bigger team that's, like secretly, ominously lurking around, with the true answer. So that's the kind of mythology that I like to put in my work. The origin of this interest is something a little bit more cliche, because so it's literally from growing up playing Age of Mythology and being very interested in strategy games. But I think one of my most prominent memories of like mythology would be like being very fascinated by Apollo's depiction in the game and how gorgeous he was. And I remember just like going to the cyber cafe and wanting to know more about him. So I would dig deeper into Greek mythology. And then I found out that he actually had a male lover. And like the 11-year-old me was just very, intrigued by how nonchalant mythology is to tell like something that's very crazy, at least to me as a Malay Muslim kid back then, and to just like tell it just as a story and nothing else. So I think like I definitely dig deeper into mythology afterwards, realizing how colorful stories can be when it comes to mythology and when it comes to folklores. it'll be very hard to choose because like they all change from time to time and depending on what kind of stuff I'm interested in. But I think a classic for me would be Burak, which is from the Islamic mythology or story, which is this mythical creature that brought the prophet through to see God. And I think Burak is very fascinating to me because when I learn about them in school, it's always depicted in a very non-visual way, because that's just how Islam's relationship is with mythology and telling stories. But I also remember growing up, I would see this really fascinating painting of this female-headed sphinx, sort of a Pegasus sort of figure on one of my relatives' house, and I would always wonder like, what is that painting about, and why, like that looks so interesting and like so wild. And it turns out it's the Burak, and like I never realized how how colorful Muslims can be when it comes to interpreting their faith and their stories. So I like Burak for that, because like you always hear about Burak as this really strong sort of like non-visual sort of a story, but then you also see Muslims still trying to depict it in their paintings. So yeah. The audience that I have in mind would be Southeast Asians and everyone who have always been interested in religion and spirituality, but never really found a safe space to dig deep into them. I hope that with my comic, people get to reignite their interest in looking back into things that are close to them spiritually or like faith-wise, and to just be reminded that it's okay to be a little bit vulnerable and to just ask more questions a little bit more without being afraid, and to look at things more loosely when it comes to our own stories. My message for the comic would be is to remind people to question how much history is the truth and how much of the truth has sadly been buried, with time and with power dynamics in, like between writers of histories, and how, like what we came to know as history is considered as history. That sounds so. But yeah, like the idea generally would be like to always remind ourselves, like when we hear something as the truth, we should always consider as it being something that's written by someone who managed to consider it as the truth and managed to consider it as history. So just like the boy in the comic, he has to go through these things and he has to see these things that seems like it has happened, but he is also being affected by like these spirits from this other dimension that perhaps want to tell him the actual truth and what actually happened. So yeah, just to remind ourselves that that's possible. I mean, not like with the whole spirits and all, but it's just the idea of like what we don't know and what we see, I mean, what we can see and what we can't see. So yeah. Bye. Thank you for watching.